In the latest episode of Ready to Love, it's time for the ladies to have the men meet their best friends. And if you've been watching closely, the problems you've been peeping finally start to get realized by the cast. So let's start off on a high note. When it comes to Quentin, he does well when it comes to Lee's friend and also Janelle's friend. Now, with Lee's friend, honestly, the woman named Muffin, it seems like if she could snatch Quentin from Lee in this whole process, she would have done so. So she wasn't that difficult. As for Janelle's friend, I think the situation has to be noted that he was going up against Herbert, and being that Herbert is so nonchalant about dating and definitely is on a timeline that's not as expedited as Janelle's, Quentin didn't really have much of a issue or competition with trying to win over Janelle's friend, so it's pretty much smooth sailing with him throughout the whole episode. The next person we have to talk about who had a rather good episode was Marielle. Marielle, when it came to meeting Sierra's friends, did well, and even with Jessica, after that whole occult thing, he, with a gift of course, he was able to convey his feelings, able to really win her back, and it seems, even though that occult and his spiritualism thing is probably something that needs to be talked about further, she's willing to let that go for now, especially because, as we'll go into a little bit later, Chris pretty much falls off her radar. While Chris doesn't really do well when it comes to Jessica, when it comes to Aries, he's pretty much fine. But again, it's sort of that situation where because the other guy just kind of flopped in the situation, that allowed people, or rather Chris that is, to really excel. Because with his competition being Phil, and Phil being very open about his past struggles, especially when it comes to his finances and jobs, it doesn't look good for him, but at the same time, you can't deny his honesty. Never mind that Aries still has a strong affection for him. Which leads into the more negative stuff. And straight up, the person who does the worst is Herbert, and that's because with Janelle, again, his nonchalant attitude, his timeline being very focused on fun over really trying to commit and get serious, it messes things up with him when it messes things up with her. It messes things up when he goes on a date with Sierra to meet her people, and then there's Katarina. When it comes to Herbert meeting Katarina's friend, he gets combative and defensive in a way that we usually only see when men are about to get cut, but instead it's even before that happens. And it just seems that as much as Herbert is definitely ready to date, as for ready for love, commitment, marriage, potentially kids, that's not perhaps in the cards of him as of where he is right now. But as noted, he isn't alone in struggling. Chris struggles when it comes to Jessica's friends because he can't really say anything positive about her beyond her looks. And then when you talk about what he needs, he pretty much rehashes all the stuff that Jessica perhaps is not. And with her friends, well, one friend, I think the other one was a mentee, knowing her, and him saying these very shallow and the type of things that make it seem like he's really not committed to what she is, but rather what she can be for him, it's very much clear to them, and definitely clear for Jessica, that this is a waste of time to even pursue further. Chris is no longer one of her interests. And then when it comes to Phil, unfortunately, he strikes out with both. Well, he strikes out definitely with Katarina, but when it comes to Aries, again, she has an emotional connection with him, so even though he doesn't do well with her friends, they've kissed, they've had good conversation, she has an emotional attachment or feeling towards him, so she'll let things slide and hope that down the road he can win her friends. But as for Katarina, when he goes on a date with her, Phil definitely wasn't as bad as Herbert, but at the same time, he wasn't really saying or doing all the things that Katarina or her friend needed to hear. So right now, Katarina pretty much wasted her time trying to see whether these two men may have some potential. And it seems, unfortunately for her, in the next episode, when they do the getaway, she's going to try to pivot over to getting Quentin's attention. Which, considering Quentin has Janelle right now, and they're still kind of Lee, that's gonna be a very fun challenge for her. Which leads to the bottom two. Now, last episode we thought Maria is gonna be at the bottom because of all the occult stuff and how the Janelle and Jessica felt about that, but he doesn't end up in the bottom two. He's not even part of the conversation, especially after his performance with Sierra and also with Jessica. Instead, it's Herbert because, he's not making much of an effort. And then it's also Chris. And it seems the saving grace for Chris right now is Aries. But as we cut down to, I believe, 4 men after this episode, it really does seem that Aries is going to be the deciding factor on whether or not it's going to be Phil that ultimately may make it to the final 3 or if it's going to be Chris. But with that said, Herbert gets cut because at this point the ladies are just not for him being pro-fun and not really pro-commitment. Getting to the predictions for the next time men are up for elimination, we got 4 men left, so only 1 can really be eliminated, and I think it's really between Chris and Phil. And as we just said, it's going to be basically who Aries is going to pick that's going to be the deciding factor in this. And, a part of me knows I could be wrong, and maybe Maria could potentially go back into the bottom, but at the same time, with him kind of moving past the feeling of having homie vibes with Sierra, and on top of that, Jessica dropping Chris, he seems a little bit more solid, so unless he says or does something terrible during the getaway, I think he's safe for now. And as for Chris or Phil, I feel like when it comes to Chris, there's perhaps more so admiration than perhaps maybe affection that Aries has for him, so I think he'll be the one eliminated. It's very hard to say, but I think there's a possibility there. Never mind, even though Phil kind of flopped when it came to Katarina's friend, they still had something going on for a little bit, so that will help compared to Chris, who she has nothing with. As for who the ladies may get eliminated, there's 6 women left, and right now Lee and Sierra have to be in the bottom 2. And I think when it comes to Lee, I feel like with her kind of being a Black Widow cast member who only really shows up to kind of double down on why somebody had to get kicked, the chances of her really making it to the final 3 is not going to happen. She doesn't really have strong connections or chemistry, at least based off of what we see in the original broadcast. There was some extra digital exclusive content released, but my thing is, if it's not part of the original broadcast, and y'all just throwing out content in order to have more followers, so we're not gonna pay attention to that. Probably should, but we're not gonna pay attention to that. Point is, Lee hasn't really had any strong connections since the beginning of this. She's barely been focused on since, I believe, as one of the men said, she's often busy, so in my heart of hearts, I feel like she's gonna be the next one eliminated. And the only reason why I say her over Sierra is because, again, Sierra and even Lee have made it this far because they're inoffensive. They don't say anything wrong, they don't do anything wrong, hence them lasting this long. But with Sierra, she has already gotten that label of being a homie, but if Maria is using her as a backup, I think the men may respect it and allow her to stick around, especially since Quentin already has Janelle, who's a lot, and now Katarina, both who have very strong personalities compared to Lee, who her friend basically said is like a grandma. And as much as I'm sure Quentin likes to work out, I'm more than likely he needs more than a workout buddy as a partner. So when it comes to the final couples, again, I don't think they're gonna make it past the reunion show, but it's gonna potentially be Janelle and Quentin, Aries and Phil, and I want to say Maria can end up with Jessica. But I don't feel strongly about any of these couples. It's just who is gonna make it through process of elimination. So the review portion is gonna be short and sweet because pretty much all we got this episode was confirmations on stuff that we already knew as viewers, but apparently it took a little bit longer for people on the show to realize. And it's basically just people seeing the light. Jessica has been shown many times that when it comes to Chris, unless you're gonna be all about him, it's not gonna work. And granted, when Aries' friends grilled him a bit, he made it appear that you can very much have your own thing going, but I don't know how true that might be. Especially if he's the type already, especially when it comes to Jessica, where he's not putting the time in and he's going to rightfully hold her accountable, but at the same time, again, this is Ready to Love, much as one in the South and in Texas. This is not the type of show where you're going to be holding somebody accountable, especially a woman talking about you're not putting enough time in. No, this show has consistently had it where if you're not putting the time in as a man, if you're not showing your interest, you are the one messing up because apparently you do not understand the game here. And Jessica is no different. So I feel very good about the thought that she has finally moved on, and now she's going to just focus on Maria and hopefully talk about the whole spiritual thing, since that seems to be a bit of a crux for her. On top of that, I'm so glad in a way that it became clear that as lovely as Leah is, the only thing that she's going to probably leave with from this show is probably a good memory or two, because otherwise, I don't want to even say that she has the same issue that Jessica may have with the men in terms of them not doing enough, but I just feel like she's not doing enough. Like, granted, there are some extreme personalities, like in Janelle and Sierra's case, where they're very like extroverted and like kind of out there, but it's sometimes better to be in that extreme where you're memorable than on Lee's extreme where it's like you're pretty, you show up, and yes, she's more than just a pretty face. She has her own career going on, but in terms of dating, she exists very much like how the minimum for a guy is to be nice and know how to carry conversation. That's where she exists. She's pretty, has her own stuff going on, but what else are you offering to this relationship? From watching this show, it's hard to say what exactly. And I don't mean to say that to be rude, but I'm starting to feel that the more situations everyone is put in, the more it seems like we said for Aries, when it comes to Chris, it's more about admiration and maybe some level of physical attraction, but not necessarily the type of chemistry that won't burn out in a short amount of time. Overall, we truly feel at this point, people are in it for the attention, free dates, and now a vacation, because love and marriage, heck, kids even, it's very hard to imagine or believe that any of that will come from any of the couples that are starting to form, mainly through process of elimination.